how far do you push conviction? When do you change? How do you make that decision when to yield and when to be very stubborn and keep going along your trajectory? So let's say you have a manifesto. Let's say you're a surrealist in the 1920s in Paris. You're André Breton, and you have a manifesto which outlines what surrealism is. How long do you stick with that, and when do you change? Because no matter what, things will change. We are living in a world where the only way of progress can happen is by iteration. So you know for sure that it is absolutely predictable that you will have to change. Now, let's say Elon Musk. How do you deal with that problem? You're working on Crispr. How do you deal with that problem? This is something that we face in our daily business at Orange Capital Partners. It's also an interesting question more generally in science, the structure of scientific revolutions. Thomas Kuhn talks about this. Then it's also, of course, very interesting in the arts world. I want to discuss this in particular with the question of Tesla and our CRISPR companies, because they both are actually facing some challenging near future events where they will have to, I think they will have to what's called pivot in Silicon Valley. They will have to get off their current trajectory and adapt. And I think they will be able to do that. This is Not Even Wrong podcast, September 25th, 2021. This is Krim Delco. It's a Saturday. There's no update. For the year, we're up 13.2%. The market is up 19.05%. We're underperforming by 6.85%. We're looking at a situation at Orange Capital Partners where we have, on the one hand, a pretty simple, I would say it's a relatively simple set of principles that we use when we invest in companies. And given how complex investing is, that's why we call it relatively simple. And one of the major pillars in this process is that leaning on the book 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, we're looking for people that are unique, that have a very specific approach to something, that are also monopolistic in the way they do it. So in other words, they have to be a little bit doctrinists. And I would say Elon Musk is definitely one of those types. He's a doctrinist. There's a certain way of doing things. I think Musk stands for things. He's not some sort of relativist or any of that stuff. But he's also, of course, he's not Lenin or Stalin or something like that. He's not like that. So he's flexible. And this is the fundamental question. We believe that Tesla is facing already a big question in terms of how they're approaching AI. And it's not the question of LiDAR or any of that stuff. I think that question has been answered. And Tesla, through its doctrinistic approach towards AI, which is vision-only based, has actually won that race. We believe that Tesla is already facing now, and definitely will face in the near future, a big question: should we go on the self-learning route, or should we stay with this explicit knowledge and learning and behavioral cloning route? This is a very good example of, I think, of a problem that somebody like Tesla is facing, where you have to kind of step aside from your doctrine. If your doctrine has been, this is how we're doing AI, well, it has to change. Now, we're pretty comfortable with Tesla doing that, because if you look at the manifestos or whatever, I think Musk calls it a master plan, excuse me. If you look at the master plan of Elon Musk, it's general enough so it allows for such changes. The master plan of Elon Musk doesn't say we are going to do AI with vision-based and explicit knowledge and etc. etc. He's just saying that he wants to decarbonize the global energy supply and also bring in autonomy in the self-drive space, and therefore, bring in autonomy into transportation, and through self-driving, build a robotaxi fleet, and therefore sort of liberate people from driving around in this messy way that what we call traffic. So there's absolutely room to pivot from being vision only and behavioral cloning, and those sort of things towards, let's say, investing resources in animation technology, and then investing resources in self-supervised reinforcement learning to go sort of the AlphaGo zero route in terms of self-driving. There is room for that. Now, having said that, it is still very difficult to do. And this is now very practical advice that I think I can give anybody out there who has worked on interesting intellectual type problems, who has worked on knowledge creation type problems. You get invested in a certain way of doing things. And the more success you have, the more invested you get. And the harder it gets to then maybe throw away some of that, if not everything, and change. So that is a fundamental problem that everybody faces, and Tesla faces too. And the question, how do you organize a company knowing that that will happen and make it flexible enough? And I think one of the answers to that question comes from Reed Hastings, the CEO and founder of Netflix, in his book, No Rules, Rules, where he outlines the culture of Netflix, which is in a way pretty harsh, because he's basically saying at Netflix, every employee, no matter how high the hierarchy, including a CEO, is continuously tested relative to the requirements of the task, of the job. And I think what he means with that, he's not very explicit about that, so that's why it sounds even worse than it probably is, because I think what this really means is not, are you capable or not capable? Let's say you're senior vice president of media content at Netflix. You're pretty capable in doing whatever you're supposed to be doing. I think the question is more, maybe the job outgrows you, maybe the environment has changed and you haven't changed enough. Maybe your skill set is not suited anymore for the environment. And this is what Netflix is doing, and they're pretty harsh about this. They're making this sort of 360-degree keeper test. I think they call it a keeper test. So should I keep my job relative to the company? So is the company still good enough for me, and am I still good enough for the company? And I think this is kind of how Tesla is functioning too. Maybe not explicitly, Musk hasn't said it that way, but if you just look at some of the departures that Tesla has, and every time people depart, everybody's shocked, particularly high-ranking people. Most recently, Jerome Guillen departed, and then JB Straubel also departed about 2 years ago. And that was always, even the stock was down for a while. And I think we at Orange Capital Partners have learned through this process that probably this is a good thing. We never know what the details are, of course, but just looking at it from this perspective, from today's episode's topics perspective, which is, how does a company make sure that its human capital, that its intellectual profile is optimizing relative to what the environment is throwing at the company? And the answer is, well, you make sure that all the senior leaders and all the way down to the functional people, that they are the best possibly suited for the task at hand. And I could see, for example, a switch now in the AI business of Tesla, where we will see more people with animation resources, DALL-E type expertise. So how can you build animation based on transformers and use deep learning methods to make better animations? That those types of tasks will be more sought after by Tesla, and maybe other tasks will be less sought after, like explicit programming tasks, or people that come from the sort of old sensor fusion, DARPA challenge type world. Maybe that's already happened, that change, because that change probably happened a few years ago when a lot of software people left and everybody threw their hands and said Tesla is a disaster, when in reality what happened within Tesla was that they stepped away from that DARPA challenge type attitude towards AI and attacked the problem in a very different way. That's why there were so many exits, and that was a good thing. So having said that, of course, we're on the outside. I can't vouch for that this is all going to happen smoothly. I can't even vouch this is happening in the first place. But again, I think Tesla has shown has a history of adapting very quickly to environmental changes. What I mean with that is, of course, environmental changes, let's say new breakthroughs in science, new breakthroughs in technology, new knowledge that is proliferating through Silicon Valley, and Tesla's very well in adapting those types of changes and implementing them where it's most effective within the business. And I think again, we expect at Orange Capital, this is a testable hypothesis that we will see more animation type experts. We will see more communication from the top, from Elon and other people on the top, talking about animation technology, because this is going to become crucial when it comes to the self-learning, which I think is really going to help propel the self-driving technology to a point where it's going to be much better than humans in a relatively short period of time. Now, the same thing actually is going on in the CRISPR community. The CRISPR community is sometimes, because it's so scientific and we're dealing with cancer and COVID and all that stuff, so biotech and medicine is sometimes looked at as more stable or less driven by disruption. But CRISPR on its own is so disruptive that it's actually being disrupted within the CRISPR. There's disruptions within the CRISPR space. So we have base editing and now prime editing, which are actually new and better ways to do the same thing. And without going into details, I think our CRISPR companies, CRISPR Therapeutics, Editas, Beam Therapeutics, Intellia, and Caribou, those are the main ones. And then there's a couple of sort of derivative type companies such as Fate Therapeutics that we believe also need to think about these things. Anyway, having said all of that, we believe that they also have to ask themselves the fundamental question, well, do we want to keep doing CRISPR? Or maybe we want to do base editing or prime editing, or how do we combine all these technologies? So these are very, very important questions. And the answer, I think, again, part of the answer lies in the Netflix approach, I think. So you make sure that the talent pool is such that you can incorporate the new technologies if needed. And what you need to do, and this is very important, this is also part of the Netflix approach, I think you have to make sure that vested interest is minimized as much as possible. It shouldn't be a race, because humans work with vested interest. You can't take the achievements of Drew Balino, let's say he's basically the second man at Tesla in charge of batteries and the car business. You can't take away his experience and his know-how and just say it's all worthless. You're going to do new things now. This is not okay. You can't take away chief science officer of Intellia, a lady from Argentina. The name eludes me right now. You can't take away all her knowledge and just say, just go do prime editing now. I think that would be detrimental to any kind of business. So you have to find a fine balance, and we don't have a perfect answer here, of course. This is a good example of where we need improvement. I think my point here is not that, oh, this is right or wrong. I'm just asking for improvement in terms of dealing with this particular problem. For example, the Netflix approach is one solution. It's very successful. I'm sure there's other solutions that can be approached. And by the way, this doesn't just apply to business. This applies to politics. This applies to art movement. Successful political movements have had that same characteristic. And it is that the manifestos or the doctrines or the fundamental values, by the way, I would say the Christian church is similar on that front. The fundamental values, the doctrine, or whatever you want to call it, is flexible enough and general enough that it captures some very important value questions without actually interfering with the day-to-day business. So let's take an example from business, Jeff Bezos. I encourage anybody to go and read Jeff Bezos' annual letters from the start of Amazon up to, you don't have to do the last couple of years, but let's say up to 2012, maybe 14, 15, something like that. That's when the Amazon stock really started taking off in terms of real actual dollar value. And I think what's really amazing is that, oh, and by the way, the same exercise, I encourage people to do that with Warren Buffett, but there I wouldn't go further than maybe 2008. But the first 40 years or 30, whatever it is, of Berkshire Hathaway's annual letters, they're an amazing read. Why? Because they give you this idea, there is a certain doctrine, there's a certain philosophy, there's something there which is timeless and doesn't change, but it's very flexible and adaptable to the environment. Berkshire Hathaway has started in a time when companies like Xerox were considered the most innovative companies in the world, and has grown and become a very valuable company through investments in various types of companies, Geico and Coca-Cola and all that stuff. The same and Amazon has started in an age when internet technology was just sort of taking off from academic circles into the real world, and look where we are today. So certainly lots of adaptation, lots of flexibility, but also certain timeless, non-changing or invariant values that are being set there. I think the same applies to Tesla. Like I said, I would say our CRISPR companies, they're less kind of the manifesto type companies if you read their annual reports and things like that. But I think when it comes to the scientific approach, they're very doctrinistic also, because these people have sometimes worked their PhDs, postgrads, all those years they've spent with that technology. And therefore, they are also a little bit wedded to those types of technologies. And the question now is, how do they manage the transitions into new types of technologies? This will be very interesting to see. We don't have the perfect answers to these questions. I'm just pointing that out. The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So this is very important. When you have a portfolio like ours with lots of innovation, lots of change, lots of iteration, you also have to ask yourself, well, how do they iterate actually with their own philosophy? Okay, they can iterate with technology, they can iterate with employees, they can iterate, but how about with their own manifestos, with their own sort of, who are we? What is the purpose of what we do? Are they actually iterating that also? And the answer there is, let's say with the Tesla, no, not so much. And that's actually understandable. You know, decarbonizing energy, freeing the human, taking the human out of the transportation equation, those are fundamental, big things that you don't need to adapt on a daily basis. How you actually do it, what you do on a daily basis, that needs to be flexible, and that is relatively flexible within our portfolio companies. So that makes us very comfortable. And again, the purpose of this podcast is not to point out that, let's say, well, Tesla is doing it right and this company is doing it wrong. It is simply we're taking this, we're pointing this out, we're stating the problem, we're offering some answers, and we're also opening the conversation here. This can go on. This is not a finished subject. This is a very important subject for anybody who invests in innovative technologies. Thank you.